I was halfway through my Tuesday night payroll review when I noticed the numbers didn't add up. $47,000 had vanished from my savings account. At first, I thought it was a system error, a misplaced digit, maybe even fatigue playing tricks on me. Then I saw the transfer authorization code. It was familiar, too familiar. Only one person still had access to that old joint account, the man who once called me his human calculator, Mark Whitmore, my ex-husband. He used to joke that I cared about spreadsheets more than people. Turns out, he just wanted my numbers. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office printer filling the silence. Most of my team had gone home. The building was quiet except for the soft click of the copy machine and the distant buzz of the vending machine light. A junior analyst passed by, glancing at me with concern. "You okay, Ms. Whitmore?" I smiled without warmth. "Oh, I'm excellent. I just found a $47,000 mistake I plan to correct." With interest. The girl laughed nervously and disappeared down the hallway. She didn't know that in my world mistakes had consequences, and Mark had just entered the wrong payroll cycle. I pulled up the company's internal system, HarborTech Payroll. As payroll manager, I oversaw every paycheck, reimbursement, and bonus that flowed through the company. Mark had left HarborTech 3 years ago after a series of failed IT projects that somehow always involved lost files and accidental overcharges. I assumed he'd moved on. I was wrong. When I typed his name into the employee search bar, the cursor blinked for a moment before spitting out a result. Mark Whitmore, IT Contract Division, active. My pulse slowed not from fear, but from focus. He was working here again. Different department, same company, a contractor. The irony was almost poetic. I opened the last payroll batch. There it was, his name buried under temporary project bonuses. Several entries each marked reimbursement, approved by finance, approved by whom my initials weren't there, but his digital signature was. The same scrawl I used to see on birthday cards and fraudulent credit card receipts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could delete every record freeze, every payment, and end his contract with a single click. But that wasn't justice. That was satisfaction. I wanted both. I saved the file and opened another window, the audit trail. Every payroll edit, every login, every transaction. There, in gray text, was his employee ID logging into the payroll system 2 weeks earlier. Unauthorized access. I exhaled slowly. "You really did it," I whispered. "You stole from the wrong woman." The office clock blinked, 9:43 p.m. I should have gone home hours ago, but I couldn't leave. I needed to see how far he'd gone. I traced the payments across departments. He'd created fake reimbursements under project codes that didn't exist, small amounts, at first $200 here, $600 there, until one transfer jumped out $12,000 tagged as system maintenance advance. That was the same day my personal account took a hit. I laughed quietly. "You clever idiot." A message pinged on my screen system notification. Unusual payroll transfer flagged for review. It was automated, sent to me the payroll manager. The system had done what he never expected. It reported him to me. I opened the log and clicked View Audit. The entire pattern unfolded like a confession letter typed in binary. Every number, every timestamp, every lie. I leaned closer, eyes scanning the lines of code, each one a breadcrumb of arrogance. I could already imagine his face when he found out who handled his next direct deposit. The idea made me grin a small, private smile that didn't reach my eyes. Revenge didn't need noise. It needed precision. I opened my notes app and typed a single-sentence audit of karma. Day 1. For years, Mark had told me I was boring, predictable, too structured. He said I'd never understand risk. But I understood something far more dangerous: documentation. Numbers don't lie. People do. I closed my laptop, took one last look at the glowing screen, and whispered to the empty room, "By Friday, your accounts will freeze, and I'll finally sleep well." The next morning, I'd come in early. I'd run the report again. I'd follow the trail calmly, clinically, like every payroll discrepancy before it. Except this time, the mistake had my ex-husband's name on it. And this time, the fix would be personal. He took money from the wrong woman, the one who processes his paycheck. Ever wondered what happens when your ex forgets who runs the payroll? When people talk about love, they rarely mention invoices. Ours began in 2015 in a small coffee shop off Pike Street, the kind with handwritten chalkboard menus and Wi-Fi that kept dropping. Mark arrived 10 minutes late carrying a grin that looked expensive. He told me he was between jobs working on something big. I believed him because I was 38, newly promoted in HR finance, and exhausted from dating men who treated ambition like a hobby. Mark called himself a startup consultant. That should have been my first red flag. Within a year, we were married, sharing a townhouse and a joint account that became my silent witness. By 2017, his consulting projects had turned into endless pitches. He said he was building an app to revolutionize small business management. I paid the rent insurance utilities, even his gym membership, while he researched investors from our couch. Every morning, he'd announce big call today, then spend 3 hours scrolling Reddit. When I'd come home, he'd say, "You're lucky, Dana. You have a steady job." I laughed the first few times. Later, I stopped. My salary was the oxygen for our life, but he was the one who acted like he was holding his breath for greatness. One December, he bought a $2,500 espresso machine and said it was an investment in productivity. I stared at it gleaming on the counter like a trophy to delusion. "It better print money, Mark," I said. He laughed and kissed my forehead the way men do when they think patronizing affection will cover the bill. By 2019, I knew the marriage was over. Not because of infidelity, at least not the romantic kind, but because of math. Every spreadsheet I opened told me the same story. His income was zero, our debts were growing, and I had become the sole shareholder in our survival. He called me cold. I called it accounting. When the divorce came in 2021, he took nothing but the espresso machine and a sense of entitlement. I thought that was a fair trade. For a while, we were civil. He'd text about mail or leftover furniture. "Hey, do you still have my blue jacket?" he'd ask. Then he'd drop by to pick it up, eat half my leftovers, and somehow leave with a bottle of wine I'd been saving. I tolerated it because it was easier than arguing. I was too tired to fight for the small things. But small things, I've learned, are where resentment earns interest. One Saturday, early 2022, he asked if I could help him check something on his taxes. You know, W-2 forms better than anyone, he said, as if that were a compliment. I hesitated. The divorce had been final for almost a year, but his tone still carried that old mix of charm and command. He showed up with a laptop smelling like cologne that didn't exist when we were married. We sat at my kitchen table. He handed me a folder labeled Important Documents that contained nothing but a half-filled tax form and a printout from a dating site. I rolled my eyes, logged into the IRS portal, and entered his credentials. He leaned over my shoulder too close. "You still remember my security questions?" he asked. "You haven't changed since 2015, I said. "That's not a compliment." He laughed, but I noticed his eyes flicking toward my personal accounts tab. I closed the window. Later that week, I received a security alert from my bank. Someone had accessed my profile but failed a verification step. The IP address matched his neighborhood. I told myself it was coincidence. It wasn't. Looking back, that moment was the opening line of the ledger I'd one day balance. He started calling more often after that. Not for conversation, Mark never called for that, but for convenience. "Hey Dana, can you check if Harbor Tech sent my 1099 Dana? I think I overpaid taxes last year. Can you double check it was all framed as harmless, nostalgic collaboration? Like we were still a team, just minus the vows and plus a few legal disclaimers." I told myself helping him was closure. What it really was habit. The habit of fixing his messes so he wouldn't have to. My therapist called it financial codependency. I called it muscle memory. Every time he left, my fridge looked emptier. He'd snack through my leftovers joke about my color-coded Tupperware and say, "You're still running this house like a payroll system." I smiled politely. Inside, something hardened. When you've been drained long enough, silence becomes its own kind of rebellion. By late 2022, we spoke only through brief transactional messages. Then he disappeared for a few months. I thought maybe he'd found another investor, another woman, another couch. I was almost relieved, until the night I saw his name pop up on LinkedIn, excited to be consulting for Harbor Tech again. The same Harbor Tech where I'd just been promoted to payroll manager. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was an eerie kind of amusement. Of all the companies in Seattle, he had walked right back into mine. He was now technically under my payroll jurisdiction. The universe, I realized, had a sense of humor. I didn't comment on his post, though I was tempted. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and whispered to myself, "Welcome back to the system, Mark." That night, I updated my password, locked every account, and stared at my bank app one more time. 47,000 still gone. A number that looked like loss but would soon read like evidence. As I closed the laptop, a thought flickered through me like static. Helping your ex with taxes is never free. You think you're assisting closure, but really you're submitting yourself to another audit. And that's the thing about helping your ex with taxes. You always get audited emotionally. The Monday after Mark's LinkedIn post, the office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer ink. Harbor Tech's HR floor was always too bright, like management thought fluorescent light could replace morale. I sat at my desk reviewing the monthly payroll batch when his name flickered on the shared dashboard, Mark Whitmore Contractor IT Division Project Code 89R. My first instinct was disbelief, followed by an almost comic sense of fate. Out of every tech company in Seattle, he had walked straight back into mine. The entry showed active status, weekly rate, and multiple reimbursements. One line caught my eye: duplicate travel expense. It was small, maybe a few $100s, but in payroll, small irregularities are the trailheads of bigger crimes. I leaned back and smiled. Excited to be consulting for Harbor Tech again, his LinkedIn caption had said. I wanted to comment, "Make sure to read your direct deposit terms carefully." Instead, I chose subtlety. Revenge doesn't start with explosions. It begins with paperwork. I opened the system logs. Mark had been reinstated through a vendor program, meaning HR had little oversight. Contractors often slipped through the cracks, trusting payroll to clean up after them. That was my kingdom. Every transaction passed under my approval queue eventually. I took another sip of lukewarm coffee and whispered, "Welcome back to the system, Mark." By noon, I was knee-deep in audit reports. Most contractors submitted receipts for travel equipment and software. Mark, however, had submitted 3 reimbursements for the same laptop model within 6 weeks. The description, essential hardware for client security protocols. The dates overlapped. The approvals came from an automated workflow. In short, he'd paid himself 3 times for one purchase, counting on bureaucracy's blindness. I changed the expense note from project expense to unauthorized self-bonus. It was a small gesture, but it felt good. The system would flag it automatically during the next compliance scan. Meanwhile, I exported his reimbursement history and attached it to a confidential file labeled Review Pending. Tina, my HR generalist and unofficial partner in gossip, leaned against my cubicle wall with a mug that said, "HR, the Department of Nope." She raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone just found an Easter egg in the budget." "Just doing my civic duty," I said. "Your civic duty looks suspiciously like a smirk." I shrugged. "Let's call it preventative accounting." Tina grinned. "You know he's been showing off downstairs, right? Telling everyone he used to be married to the payroll manager. Like that makes him bulletproof. That makes him traceable," I said. Tina chuckled. "You're terrifying, Dana. Remind me never to cross you." "You're safe," I said, tapping the keyboard. "You submit your receipts on time." That afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Mark in the lobby. He looked the same: expensive haircut, cheap arrogance. He was talking to someone from IT, laughing too loudly. When he saw me, he hesitated, offering a smile that pretended familiarity, but smelled of nerves. "Dana," he said, walking over. "Small world, huh?" "Smaller than you think," I replied. He adjusted his tie like it was a shield. "Listen, no hard feelings about before. Let's keep things professional." "Of course," I said, my tone smooth as glass. "That's all I've ever been." He nodded, relieved, and strutted away. He had no idea the system was already flagging his name for duplicate reimbursements. I didn't need confrontation. I had automation. A week later, HR received a ticket from the IT division. Employee dispute regarding withholding tax error, the subject line read. I clicked open the form. Complainant, Mark Whitmore. Reviewer, payroll manager, Dana Whitmore. I actually laughed out loud. The universe was writing satire. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Wednesday. I spent Tuesday night preparing. I printed his payment records, flagged the reimbursements, and even added sticky notes with cheerful comments like, "Nice try." I wanted to be ready, not cruel. The next morning, he walked into the HR conference room wearing a confident smirk. "There's been some mistake," he began before sitting. "My last 2 payments were taxed incorrectly. I think someone accidentally changed my status code." I folded my hands. "Oh, Mark, I thought you loved surprises." His expression flickered. "What you're listed as an independent contractor, but your reimbursements are being processed as employee expenses. That triggers auto withholding. So fix it," he snapped. "That's your job, isn't it?" "It is," I said evenly, "and it's also my job to ensure compliance with federal reporting, which means any irregularities have to go through review. Irregularities." He shifted in his chair. "What are you implying?" I slid a printout across the table. 3 reimbursements for the same laptop model. Same serial number, same purchase date. He looked down, then forced a laugh. "Clerical error. You know how messy systems get." "Yes," I said, "I do." I let the silence hang heavy and deliberate. He fidgeted. "So you'll fix it, I'll document it," I replied. "Compliance will decide from there." His jaw tightened. "Dana, come on, we're adults." "Exactly," I said. "So act like one." He stood abruptly. "You always loved having the last word." "Only when it's correct," I said. When he left, Tina peeked into the room. "That looked fun," she said. "He thinks you're targeting him." "He's right," I said, "but I'm doing it legally." She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Later that afternoon, I received an automated alert reimbursement flagged for audit. User M. Whitmore. I didn't even need to touch it. The system was doing the revenge for me. I leaned back and let out a breath that felt lighter than satisfaction. It was justice wrapped in compliance policy. For the rest of the week, the office buzzed quietly with rumors. People noticed Mark spending more time on the phone, more time pacing. He told coworkers his ex-wife in payroll was sabotaging him. Tina texted me from 2 desks away. "He's digging his own grave." I replied, "I'm just handing him the shovel." On Friday, I received a call from finance asking about a vendor payment discrepancy. I opened the file. Of course, it was Mark again attempting to submit another expense under a vendor name suspiciously similar to his own initials. I corrected it, flagged it, and added a note. Pending verification. Possible duplication. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was sport. That evening, as the office emptied and the lights dimmed to motion sensors, I sat in the glow of my monitor, sipping the last of my coffee. The quiet hum of servers surrounded me. Payroll systems never sleep, and neither does karma. I typed a final note into my log. Unauthorized self-bonus corrected. Audit pending. Then I smiled, closed the file, and whispered, "Your tax season just started, Mark." By Monday morning, I had a new spreadsheet open on my desktop. 3 columns, bold headers, no mercy. Transaction lie payback plan. I called it the audit of karma. It looked innocent enough like any other payroll tracker, but every row was a breadcrumb of revenge, disguised as administrative diligence. I wasn't sabotaging him. I was auditing him. There is a difference. One is impulsive. The other is methodical. Tina leaned on the side of my cubicle, sipping coffee that smelled suspiciously like she had added whiskey. "You're in early again," she said. "HarborTech doesn't pay you enough for that level of dedication." "It's not dedication," I said. "It's quality control." She glanced at my screen. Audit of karma. Wow. Very subtle. I grinned. "I like transparency." "And vengeance," she added. "Equal parts," I said. We both laughed quietly. Humor is the HR department's coping mechanism. By mid-morning, I was digging through the expense reports Mark had filed under client entertainment. There were receipts from a downtown restaurant called Ocean Fire. The total came to $180 for oysters, champagne, and dessert for two. He had labeled it client dinner, strategic networking. I called Tina over. "You ever hear of a client named Vanessa?" I asked. She squinted at the screen. "No, but I follow HarborTech employees on Instagram. Didn't he post a picture last week? Same restaurant, same night." Caption said, "Perfect evening." I tilted my head. Strategic indeed. Tina chuckled. $180 for oysters. I hope she was worth it. I opened the image file of his receipt. There in the corner was a note scribbled by the waiter, "Happy anniversary." Subtlety had never been Mark's strength. I copied the expense record into my spreadsheet. Under Transaction Ocean Fire Dinner, under Lie Client Meeting. Under Payback Plan Flag for Audit with Love. I created a folder labeled Receipts of Delusion and filled it with every suspicious report he had filed over the past month. Travel to Portland that never appeared in the company calendar. Software subscriptions that matched the tools he once used for his side hustle. A conference ticket for Data Innovators 2022, an event that had been canceled due to low attendance. Every line told a story, and I was compiling a novel. Around noon, I drafted an anonymous email to the CFO's office. I used a neutral subject line, "Expense Verification Inquiry." The message was short, polite, and devastating. Attached are several questionable expense submissions from IT contractor Mark Whitmore. Please review for compliance inconsistencies. Highlights in red indicate potential duplication or personal use. Regards, concerned employee. I attached the file and hesitated only a second before clicking send. The satisfying whoosh of the sent email felt like an applause cue only I could hear. 10 minutes later, Tina messaged me on the company chat. "You look suspiciously calm. Did you commit payroll homicide? Just an audit," I typed. An emotional audit. She replied with a single emoji, "Scales of justice." I smiled and took another sip of coffee. By late afternoon, a quiet ripple moved through the HR floor. The CFO's assistant had begun pulling random expense reports for spot checks. Someone from finance walked by whispering about an anonymous tip. I kept my face neutral. Mark, however, didn't. He appeared at the vending machine, his voice louder than usual, complaining about micromanagement and bureaucratic nonsense. I made a note in my log, Week 1, subject agitated, observation guilt makes noise. At 4:00 p.m., Tina poked her head into my office. "He's losing it," she said, barely containing a laugh. "He told Ide his reimbursement got delayed and threatened to escalate to corporate." "Corporate," I said. "That's adorable." "You should see him pacing. He's acting like he's being audited by the FBI." "Close enough," I said, closing my notebook. "This is HR. We have better paperwork." That evening, after everyone left, I reviewed the system's audit trail again. Every reimbursement he filed now glowed with a yellow warning icon pending verification. The CFO's office had opened a case. I didn't need to add fuel. The machine was already running. Still, I couldn't resist one final touch. I printed a single page of his ocean fire receipt, highlighted the words, "Happy Anniversary," and slipped it into my private file labeled Case Study Whitmore. I wrote a short note on the bottom margin. Week 1, audit complete. Subject unaware. The office was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I looked around at the empty desks, the screensaver reflections flickering on glass walls. HR at night always feels like purgatory quiet fluorescent, filled with ghosts of bad decisions. I thought about all the women who had sat in my chair before balancing logic and emotion, paycheck and pain. There's something uniquely satisfying about revenge through systems. It doesn't scream, it documents. Before shutting down, I reopened my spreadsheet and scrolled through the rows. Transaction Lie Payback Plan. It looked cleaner than any love story we ever had. Each formula balanced, each cell reconciled. For years, I had supported him, made excuses, covered debts, turned lies into forgiveness. Now I was converting them into data. It was almost poetic. On my drive home, the city lights blurred past in soft halos. A radio host was talking about Mercury in retrograde, blaming it for everyone's chaos. I laughed quietly. I didn't need astrology to explain karma. I just needed Excel. It started with a notification. Thursday morning, 9:12 a.m., an automated system alert appeared in my inbox. Subject line, unusual payroll transfer. Flagged for review. At HarborTech, those alerts were common, usually harmless mistakes from someone entering an extra zero or mislabeling an expense. But the timestamp caught my attention. The transfer had been made at 11:47 p.m. the night before. After hours. That was never normal. I opened the audit log, eyes narrowing as the screen populated with rows of data. Transfer origin, IT project, sub-fund. Transfer destination contractor advance group. Authorization Mark Whitmore. My stomach didn't drop, it tightened, coiling like a spring. He had accessed the internal payroll platform and added himself to a project disbursement group, redirecting $12,000 in advance compensation. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, almost laughing. He added himself to a payroll run, I processed. I whispered, "That's not bold. That's suicidal accounting." The absurdity of it almost impressed me. He had somehow forgotten that I was the final checkpoint before those records became official. I could have deleted it with a click, reversed the transaction, and ended it there. But that would have been too merciful. No, I wanted the system to expose him, not me. Revenge that looked like justice. I opened the company's internal audit portal, typed a new case title, Unverified Payroll Entry, Project Code 89R. In the comments box, I wrote, Possible Ghost Employee, Unauthorized Addition to Payroll List. Please verify. I didn't sign it. Anonymous submissions carried more weight because they triggered automatic CFO review. It took less than a minute to upload the evidence, the timestamp, the authorization ID, and a screenshot of his self-approval. I hit send, then sat back, sipping my coffee like a woman who had just mailed a confession that wasn't hers. Tina arrived at my cubicle a few minutes later, waving a breakfast sandwich. "You look like someone who knows a secret." "I do," I said, "and it's delicious." "Care to share?" she asked. Let's just say someone's side hustle just turned into a compliance nightmare. She raised an eyebrow. "Mark always." She sat down across from me, unwrapping her sandwich slowly. "You're terrifying when you're calm." "Calm is my weapon," I said. "Anger gets caught. Calm gets results." By noon, I received a follow-up email from the CFO's office. The message was brief. "We've received your audit report. Internal investigation initiated. Thank you for your vigilance." I smiled to myself. Mark had finally earned the attention he always thought he deserved. At 3 p.m., it began restricting account permissions for security verification. Mark's access was among the first to be temporarily suspended. He must have realized it immediately because at 3:07, I saw his name flash on the caller ID. I didn't answer. The voicemail notification blinked seconds later. His voice was clipped defensive. "Dana." I think the system glitched. My account got locked. "You handle this stuff right. Can you check what's going on?" I saved the message, labeling it Exhibit A. Revenge doesn't always need confrontation. Sometimes it just needs silence. The next morning, the IT help desk was buzzing. Mark had apparently called 4 times, escalating from polite to impatient to outright panicked. I overheard fragments from Tina's desk. "No, sir, we cannot bypass audit protocol. Yes, your credentials are still under review. No, we don't have an estimated time." Tina leaned back, covering her phone's receiver. "He's losing it," she whispered. "He told IT he has urgent client deadlines. They told him they have urgent compliance requirements. The circle of life," I said, pretending to focus on a report. Friday afternoon brought another email from finance. The CFO himself had requested a meeting with the IT division to review recent payroll anomalies. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. I already knew the culprit would be sitting across from a table of executives, trying to explain why his name appeared as both the approver and beneficiary of a $12,000 transfer. That kind of self-authorization is like writing a love letter to the audit team. They always read it aloud. At 4:30, Tina stopped by again. "You're going to love this," she said. He's telling everyone there was a system bug, claims he accidentally duplicated an approval file while testing permissions. Did he? I asked. Oh, definitely, she said with a grin. He accidentally duplicated fraud. That night, as I packed up my laptop, my phone buzzed. Another voicemail from Mark. His tone had shifted. Hey, just checking if you've heard anything. They froze my access again. I can't even log my hours. This is ridiculous. You've got connections, right? Can you help? I played it twice, then archived it. My office window overlooked the parking lot. His car was still there. Headlights dim. Engine idling. He was probably inside making calls, rewriting his story, hoping someone believed him before the audit report arrived. I didn't feel pity, just inevitability. Actions have balance sheets, too. Over the weekend, I drafted a few extra entries in my private log, Week 2, Escalation Phase, Subject unaware of reporter identity, CFO investigation in progress. On Monday morning, the real storm began. I arrived early as usual, coffee in hand. The security guard greeted me with a smirk. Busy day ahead, he said. They're running an internal audit on IT. Heard some big names are sweating. Oh, I asked, feigning surprise. What kind of audit? Payroll related, he said. The kind that makes people suddenly remember their passwords. Upstairs, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. The IT floor was quieter than a library. Every click of a keyboard sounded suspicious. At 10 a.m., I received a call from the CFO's assistant. Dana, we're reviewing a payroll entry that appears to involve an IT contractor. We'd like to confirm your records from last quarter. Of course, I said. I'll pull the files. I sent them exactly what they needed, clean, factual, time-stamped. No opinion, no emotion, just data. By noon, the internal chat channels were full of speculation. Someone in IT is under investigation. Compliance caught something huge. Finance blocked a $12,000 transfer. I said nothing. That afternoon, Mark called IT again. They patched him through to me by mistake. Dana, finally, he said, relief flooding his voice. They're saying you're the one who flagged my account. Can you fix this? Tell them it's an error. I let the silence hang for a beat before answering. Mark, if it's really an error, the system will clear you. You know how slow these systems are? He snapped. I could lose my contract. Then maybe next time, I said softly, you should double-check your entries before authorizing your own payments. He started to speak, but I ended the call. By Friday, he called IT again. By Monday, IT called me. The audit trail had officially named him as the source of the unauthorized transfer. His credentials were revoked pending formal review, and all I had to do was keep processing payroll like nothing happened. By Wednesday morning, the tension in the HR floor was thick enough to count as a liability. Everyone knew something was happening, but no one dared say the name. The internal memo went out at 9 a.m. sharp. Subject mandatory compliance review. IT contractor Mark Whitmore. I read it twice before pretending to be surprised. The meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. in conference room B, which was notorious for its flickering light and broken thermostat. It always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and anxiety. Tina appeared at my cubicle holding her phone like a reporter holding breaking news. You saw the memo, she whispered. Front row seat to karma, I said. I might bring popcorn. You're evil, she said, grinning, but in a very ethical way. At 10:55, Mark strutted into the HR hallway looking more nervous than he wanted to appear. His tie was crooked, his collar damp. He passed my desk, avoiding eye contact, then doubled back. Hey, Dana, he said, voice tight. You're not involved in this, right? In what I asked, looking up innocently. The investigation, he said. They said something about payroll discrepancies. I smiled. Then they'll clear it up. He hesitated, searching my face for something sympathy alliance, maybe weakness. He found none. This is all a mistake, he said. You know how messy systems are. Messy people make messy systems, I replied. He opened his mouth to retort, then shut it again. The HR manager, Laura, stepped out of her office. Mark, we're ready for you. He followed her in shoulders, tight fake confidence cracking around the edges. Tina slipped into the chair beside me, phone hidden under a folder. I wish we had a live feed, she muttered. Corporate reality TV. It's better without cameras, I said. People get honest when they think no one's watching. 15 minutes later, my screen pinged with a message from Tina. Girl, the man just confessed the plot twist for us. I nearly spit my coffee. What I typed. She replied instantly. He said, and I quote, "This is all a mistake. My ex handles payroll. She must have done something." I stared at the message, then started laughing quietly. The kind of laugh you can't stop once it starts. The kind that sounds like freedom. Your ex Laura's voice must have echoed across the conference room like a bell. Tina sent another message. She repeated it. Whole room froze. I imagined the scene, the HR manager raising an eyebrow, the CFO leaning forward, the IT compliance officer making a note. Mark had handed them the headline himself. My ex handles payroll. There was poetic justice in that sentence. A few minutes later, I received another message from Tina. You're going to love this. They found payments to a company called Harbor Consulting LLC. Guess who owns it? I typed no. She wrote back, yes, his best friend Brian. Registered 2 months ago. Same street address as Mark's old apartment. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the satisfaction settle in. This was no longer petty revenge. This was an education. He hadn't just stolen, he'd built an entire side channel of fake invoices funneling company money to his buddy. He'd turned corruption into a friendship project. They traced it through his email. Tina messaged again. Invoices signed off with his initials. I swear you can't write satire this good. I stared at the screen, my heart calm, my mind sharp. It wasn't gloating, I felt it was confirmation. For years he'd called me boring, predictable, incapable of risk. But look who was sweating under fluorescent lights because he couldn't calculate consequences. I leaned back, letting the hum of the office fade into white noise. In my head, a symphony played, the kind of slow, triumphant music that plays when the villain finally realizes the story isn't his. At 11:45, the conference room door opened. Mark emerged, face pale, jaw tight, tie half untied. His phone buzzed in his hand, but he didn't answer. Laura followed him out, clipboard in hand, expression neutral, the professional version of, "You're done." Tina watched from the corner of her cubicle. "Dead man walking," she whispered. Mark's eyes met mine across the hallway. For a moment, time held still. There was no shouting, no accusation, just silent understanding. He knew, I knew, and neither of us needed to say a word. He turned away, heading toward IT to plead his case. Tina broke the silence. "You know what's wild," she said. "He actually said they should check your records, like you'd risk your career to mess with his petty paycheck. He's not used to women having quiet power," I said. "He thinks control always looks like noise." She smirked. "So what now?" "Now we let the process work," I said, "and maybe I'll buy lunch." "Celebratory oysters," she teased. "Only if he pays," I said. The rest of the day unfolded like an office farce. It couldn't restore his access because compliance had locked his credentials for further investigation. Finance refused to release his pending payments until the audit was complete. He spent the afternoon pacing between departments, muttering about lawsuits and favoritism, trying to convince anyone who would listen that this was all his ex-wife's fault. I didn't correct him. Let him talk. Every word was another nail in his professional coffin. Around 3 p.m., I got another message from Tina. They confirmed it. Harbor Consulting LLC is a shell company. CFO just informed legal. He's toast. I smiled, closed my spreadsheet, and took a long, steady breath. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something quieter, order restored. He called me boring for years. Now the most exciting thing in his life was an audit. I opened my logbook and wrote, Week 3, subject confronted, confession indirect, investigation active. Then I added one more line underlined, twice victory pending coffee hot. By Friday morning, the building carried a hush that did not belong to payroll week and did not belong to weather either, but to a shared suspicion that something irreversible was about to be said out loud. HR had sent a calendar block to every department head the night before with a subject line that sounded like a warning bell, masked as routine. company update and audit results, mandatory attendance, 10 o'clock, atrium hall. I arrived early with a paper cup of coffee and a folder I did not need, because everything important today lived in the servers and in the small, cruel memory of numbers that do not forget. Tina met me near the back row and nudged my arm toward 2 empty seats tucked behind a support pillar. Best angle, she whispered, less splash if someone throws a fit. I smiled and sat. People filed in with the body language of a fire drill that might be real this time. The manufacturing leads in their HarborTech polos, the office staff in careful neutrals, IT looking like they wish they could reboot the morning. Mark slid in from a side door a minute before the hour. He wore a suit he thought made him look senior, and a face he hoped made him look innocent. He scanned the room and stopped when he found me. I lifted my cup without expression. He looked away and took a seat 3 rows from the front near the aisle, like someone planning an exit that would not save him. At 10 sharp, the CFO walked onto the small stage with a legal pad and a remote for the projector. The CEO stood beside her with arms folded and a public smile that had run out of uses. "Thank you for being here," the CFO said. "We will keep this concise and factual. There have been questions regarding recent payroll anomalies and expense reimbursements. Our internal review is complete." The lights dimmed. The first slide appeared with a header that made the room inhale at once. "Employee found misusing payroll systems. Mark Whitmore." It is a strange thing to watch shock ripple across a crowd. It does not move like laughter, and it is not a cheer. It is a held breath that turns the air heavy and makes 200 people the same temperature. Mark did not move. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly, as if bracing for a wave he could not see but could feel pulling. The CFO clicked to the next slide. A clean timeline appeared. Dates, timestamps, screenshots of authorization entries. The log entries showed an after-hours access, followed by an unauthorized addition to the contractor advance group. 12,000 transferred. Approval and beneficiary the same user. The CFO spoke evenly. "Our systems record every action. These entries are tied to one credential set and one workstation location." She clicked again. The projector displayed digital signatures from reimbursement forms and a set of invoices issued by a vendor named Harbor Consulting LLC. The legal counsel stepped forward to note the registration date and the listed address, then the CFO resumed. The approvals were automated because the submissions were coded as routine. They were not routine. An image of a laptop receipt appeared 3 times with the same serial number. The note on the next slide read, "Duplicate reimbursements for identical asset." At the edge of my vision, I saw heads pivot toward Mark, like a field of sunflowers rotating to a darker sun. He cleared his throat and raised a hand. "With respect, this is being taken out of context," he said. "There was a system bug. I filed a ticket. It will confirm." The CFO did not look at him. "It has already confirmed that no system bug existed at those times," she said. She clicked again. A screen capture of his help desk history appeared with no tickets filed on the dates of the transfers. He shifted in his chair and turned a shade that looked expensive to maintain. The HR manager stepped forward with a slim folder and spoke without perfume. We also reviewed expense claims labeled "Client Entertainment." She held up photocopies. "Here are line items for a dinner at Ocean Fire. 2 guests, champagne and oysters." The waiter wrote "Happy Anniversary" on the receipt. The room made a small sound that was not kind. Mark tried again. That was a meeting with a client and his spouse. Personal note by the staff. Misunderstanding. HR placed a second document on the table. A screenshot of his public photo from the same night with a caption that had aged poorly. "Perfect evening. No clients tagged." The projector did not blink. He once said I would never make him look small. He was right. The projector did that for me. The CFO moved to the financial implications. Funds in question total $47,000 to date across unauthorized advances, duplicate reimbursements, and vendor payments to an entity beneficially linked to a personal associate. Legal has initiated recovery procedures. The company will pursue restitution. Until this matter is resolved, all associated accounts are frozen." She let the last sentence land like a stamp. The CEO finally spoke. "We are a company built on hard work and straight dealing. We do not tolerate misuse of systems or trust. Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore's contract is terminated for cause pending final paperwork. Security will escort you to collect personal items. Access has been revoked." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of judgment that had been waiting for permission to speak. Mark stood. For a second, he looked human and frightened, and then he reached for arrogance like a coat on the wrong hook. "This is retaliation," he said loudly. "My ex handles payroll. She has a vendetta." Several heads turned toward me. I took a calm sip of coffee and looked at the stage. The CFO did not change expression. "The findings are based on system records, not personal opinions," she said. "The logs are immutable. The authorizations carry your credential and were executed from your device." HR added that all review steps were conducted by cross-functional staff under standard protocol. The CEO closed the loop. "If you have any documentation that exonerates you, you can provide it to legal. Otherwise, this discussion is complete." He opened his mouth again and then saw the two security staff who had appeared with the quiet speed of professionals who do unpleasant tasks well. He closed it. His gaze found mine one more time across the half-dark room. I did not gloat. I did not smirk. I let the moment pass across my face like a cloud. In slow motion, people began to move. Chairs scraped lightly. A few short laughs broke free, and then were tucked away out of politeness. Tina leaned toward me and whispered, "That is one paycheck I will never process again." I nodded and answered in the same soft tone, "That is one paycheck I will never process again." We both stared at the screen as if it were still speaking. Security guided Mark toward the aisle. He brushed past a row of colleagues who did not meet his eyes. His phone vibrated in his hand and then went silent when he remembered his access had been cut. There is a particular sound to a life being locked out. It is not a door slam. It is the absence of a familiar click. The CFO opened the room for questions. A few department heads asked about policy updates and audit cadence. She answered with calm specificity. New two-step approvals for contractor reimbursements, quarterly spot checks by finance and HR, mandatory ethics refreshers. The meeting ended not with applause, but with the collective relief of a system rebalancing itself. In the hallway, people spoke in low voices that rose briefly at the words "frozen accounts" and "vendor shell." Some looked at me with a new kind of respect that had nothing to do with friendliness and everything to do with fear of the machine I understood. I returned to my desk and opened the payroll dashboard. His profile showed the same status across every tab. Access revoked. Payments on hold. Final settlement pending legal review. In accounting language, frozen does not mean dead. It means paused until justice catches up. Tina swiveled into my doorway and sat without asking. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am better than okay," I said. "I am correct." She laughed and covered her mouth like a child in church. "You are impossible." "Thank you," she added after a beat, for letting the system do it, for not turning it into a spectacle. I closed a browser window that did not need to be open and looked at the office beyond her shoulder. "Spectacles end fast," I said. "This ends right." After lunch, I walked to the atrium for air. Mark was at the reception desk with security beside him, and a small cardboard box containing the universal debris of a short tenure: a coffee mug, a tangle of cables, a stack of papers he would not need anymore. He did not look at me as the doors opened. The winter light outside was too bright for him. He stepped into it anyway, and the doors closed with a soft seal like a signature. Back at my desk, my inbox pinged with a final notice from finance. Action taken. Contractor terminated for cause. Accounts at HarborTech suspended pending restitution. I read it once and then again. And then I shut my eyes and let the hum of the building settle over me, like a blanket that had finally been mended. He had been certain I could never make him look small. He was right. I never had to. The numbers did it. The projector did it. The room did it. Justice had not shouted. It had shone. And somewhere in the architecture of servers and policies, a single message continued to loop with clinical indifference. Access denied. 2 weeks after the company meeting, the quiet of my house had settled into something close to peace. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and new beginnings. I had finally deleted his number, emptied the last joint account, and bought a new coffee maker that cost exactly 1/10 of the one he once called an investment in productivity. It brewed silence better than he ever did conversation. That Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I was in Slipper's hair, still damp, and the dog barked once then gave up like it already knew who was on the other side. I opened the door, and there he stood. Mark Whitmore, former contractor, former husband, current cautionary tale. He held a bouquet of grocery store flowers, the kind wrapped in cellophane that crinkles too loudly. The petals were tired, like they wanted to be anywhere else. He offered them like evidence. "You won okay," he said. "But I am broke. I need help." His voice carried that same false humility he used when asking for a loan he never intended to repay. I leaned against the doorframe and let him talk. He launched into a monologue about how hard life had been since the termination, how the audit ruined his reputation, how no one would hire him because of the online posts. He said words like, "unfair" and "mistake," and "you know me." I sipped my coffee and looked at the flowers. The price tag was still attached. $4.99. Clearance. The man who once bragged about stock options now brought me markdown lilies. I said, "Mark, I don't do charity, especially for bad investments." His jaw twitched. I could see the anger flicker behind his tired act. He tried to soften it. "I am not asking for much, just until I find a new contract, maybe a small loan or some advice." "Advice is free," I said. "Here is mine. Try honesty." He laughed once, sharp, like breaking glass. "You think you are better than me now, huh?" I said, "No, Mark, I was always better. I just stopped pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was almost kind. He shifted the bouquet from one hand to the other, as if waiting for permission to leave it. I nodded toward it. "You can keep those. They already look like regret." He hesitated, then set them on the porch railing anyway. The stems dripped onto the wood, leaving small stains that would dry into reminders. He mumbled something about karma and walked down the path to his car, a dull gray sedan that looked as defeated as he did. I watched him go, not with triumph, but with the quiet recognition that I was finally done grading his excuses. When I stepped back inside, the dog sniffed the flowers and sneezed. I said exactly what I was thinking. Same. I made another cup of coffee and opened my laptop to check emails. In the list of notifications, one caught my eye. Venmo payment received from Mark Whitmore, $20 note reads, "Apology." I stared at it for a full minute before laughing so hard I had to put the mug down. He had actually sent me money. The man who once faked invoices now sending digital peace offerings like confession coins. I decided to treat it as what it was, a transaction. I labeled it reimbursement. Then, for my own amusement, I took a picture of the wilted bouquet and sent it to his Venmo with a request for $4.99 labeled floral waste management fee. 5 minutes later, it showed as paid. I texted Tina the screenshot. She called instantly, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. "You are a menace," she said. I said, "No, I am an accountant with closure." Later that afternoon, I called my bank to report a small erroneous refund. The agent asked if I wanted to reverse the transfer. I said absolutely not. Keep it as evidence of lessons learned. She chuckled and flagged it as retained credit. $20 well earned. That night I wrote in my logbook, Week 5. Subject attempted emotional audit. Payment received. Case closed. I underlined the last 2 words twice. The next morning, I took the wilted bouquet to the trash. One of the petals stuck to my hand like static. For a second, I remembered the early years, the shared apartment, the cheap furniture, the small dreams we thought would grow into something. Then I dropped the pedal and watched it fall. Some debts cannot be repaid. Some are meant to teach you interest rates on arrogance. Sunday afternoon, Tina stopped by with takeout and her usual commentary. She looked at the empty vase on the counter and asked if the flowers were from who she thought they were. I nodded. She said, "Please tell me you charged him for delivery." I said, "Better, I invoiced him for depreciation." She almost spilled her soup laughing. "You are dangerous," she said again. I smiled. "No," I said, "just accurate." We ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the light shifted toward evening, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight when someone mentioned his name, just distance measured in peace. When Tina left, I cleaned the table and noticed a small card under the vase. It was blank except for one line in his handwriting. "Sorry for everything." I turned it over and wrote my own response before tossing it into the shredder. "You're welcome for the audit." The paper disappeared into ribbons, and with it, the last trace of him in my house. I sat back down with the dog curled beside me and thought about how small justice can look. Sometimes it is a headline. Sometimes it is a quiet refund that never goes back. Monday morning started with the kind of email that makes every cup of coffee taste better. The subject line read, "Internal Recognition Notice." I clicked it expecting a generic thank you template from HR, maybe a badge, or a digital certificate shaped like a handshake. Instead, it opened with my name in bold and the line, "Congratulations on identifying and preventing payroll misuse, resulting in significant savings for HarborTech. Effective immediately, you have been awarded a $10,000 bonus." I reread it twice to make sure I was not hallucinating caffeine. Then I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen. Technically, Mark gave me a raise. I forwarded the message to Tina with the subject line, "Payroll Justice Served," and added 3 words in the body, "Coffee's on me." She replied instantly with a meme of a crown and the caption, "Queen of Audits." I considered printing it and framing it next to my degree. Around noon, the CFO called. She thanked me for my discretion and professionalism and said the board had been impressed with the way I documented everything. They were rolling out a new internal training module based on my case notes. Apparently, my petty diligence had become corporate curriculum. I said that was flattering and slightly terrifying. She laughed and said sometimes justice hides in spreadsheets. After the call, I sat at my desk staring at the transfer notification in my bank app. $10,000 clean, legal, poetic. I wrote a note in my logbook. Week 6. Reward disbursed. Subject officially bankrupt in both finance and reputation. Karma balance trending positive. That evening, I took myself to dinner at the same restaurant where Mark had once charged oysters to a fake client account. I ordered the same dish, tipped double, and raised a quiet toast to due process. The waiter asked if I was celebrating anything. I said yes, good accounting. Meanwhile, the HR network lit up. Tina sent me a screenshot from an industry Slack channel. A pinned post read, "Do not hire Mark Whitmore, former HarborTech contractor involved in payroll misconduct, confirmed audit case." Comments below ranged from predictable gossip to professional warnings. Someone added a meme of a burning paycheck. Tina captioned it with "Poetic Justice has a filing cabinet." I replied with a single word, "filed." The humor carried a darker satisfaction. He had once boasted that no one could touch him because he knew the system. Turns out the system knew him too. A few days later, I got another email from the CFO, this one forwarded from a partner company. Subject termination of agreement. The message was short and surgical. Effective immediately, Harbor Consulting LLC will no longer be retained for external IT services. The decision follows recent findings confirming misuse of HarborTech funds. The closing line read, "Please update your records accordingly." I did not need to. My records were already immaculate. Tina messaged Guess Brian's startup just hit liquidation. I replied, "Collateral damage depreciated." She said you should teach ethics. I said I already did accidentally. On Friday afternoon, I walked past the break room and overheard 2 new hires whispering. One said, "Did you hear about the contractor who scammed the company?" The other said, Yeah, some ex handled payroll and caught him. She's like a legend. I kept walking with my coffee and smiled into the steam. Legends apparently wear ID badges and sensible shoes. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered on, I sat at my desk finishing monthly reconciliations. The rhythm of numbers felt like meditation now. I thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation, the discovery, the investigation, the slow, steady arc of consequences that did not need shouting to be heard. Justice had not arrived in fury but in documentation. Every log, every timestamp, every report had been a thread that tied itself into closure. I opened my notebook and did what I always did. I balanced the story. 47,000 stolen, 10,000 bonus, $22 worth of flowers. That's a net gain in karma. I underlined it twice and added a smiley face for irony. Outside rain began tapping the window. I watched it for a long time, thinking about how water cleans everything given enough time. Some stains fade quietly, some require an audit. Before shutting down my computer, I checked my inbox one last time. A new message from HR popped up. Subject Annual Ethics Training Reminder. The irony made me laugh again. I clicked complete before even reading the material. I had lived it. On my way out, I passed the security desk. The guard, an older man who had seen every corporate scandal the building could hold, looked up and said, "You're Dana, right?" I nodded. He said, "You handled that whole mess real clean. Most folks would have lost their heads." I smiled. "Accounting teaches patience," I said. He nodded slowly. "My wife could use that. She still keeps receipts from 2003. I said, tell her to file them alphabetically. It helps with closure." We both laughed, and I stepped out into the cool night. The rain had slowed to a mist that felt like forgiveness. The streetlights reflected on the pavement in neat symmetrical lines, like columns balancing themselves. I thought about how much of life comes down to reconciliation, not revenge. The difference is interest. I reached home, fed the dog, poured a small glass of wine, and checked my Venmo, just for the amusement of seeing the $20 credit still sitting there. I labeled it lesson fee. Then I wrote the final entry in my ledger. Week 8. Balance achieved. Subject irrelevant. Piece taxable at 0%. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and let the quiet do what it does best: account for everything left unsaid. The first Thursday of every month, the local Chamber of Commerce hosted a networking circle called Women in HR Finance. It was mostly coffee muffins and stories told in cautious tones about payroll chaos or policy battles. I had gone once years ago, when Mark still existed as a husband-shaped expense, and I never went back. But now, for reasons I couldn't quite name, I went again. The meeting was held in a small conference room above a credit union in downtown Portland. The walls were pale blue, the kind of color that tries too hard to be calm. I took a seat near the back with a cup of weak coffee and waited. When it came time for the open floor, a woman named Linda spoke first. She was in her late 50s, silver haircut like authority. She said she'd discovered her ex-husband had drained their joint retirement account over 3 years. He told her he was managing the returns. The only return was an empty statement. She was shaking when she said it, one hand still clutching the paper as if it might apologize. Another woman murmured sympathy and passed her a napkin. The air felt heavy with all the math of betrayal. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the facilitator asked if anyone else wanted to share a case about financial misconduct, my hand moved before my brain could veto. I stood up, heart steady, like it had already practiced this. I said I once worked with a contractor who manipulated payroll systems for personal gain. The room leaned forward. I did not say he was my ex-husband. I did not say his name. I said we caught it, documented it, and corrected it. I said sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens, but with spreadsheets. Someone laughed softly through her tears. Another asked how it felt when it was finally over. I said calm, not happy, not vindicated, just calm, like reconciling an account you'd ignored for years. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes and said her ex-husband forged her signature on a mortgage. Another admitted she was still paying off her ex's debt just to keep her credit alive. Someone whispered, I thought I was the only one. The room shifted from numbers to confessions. It felt like a therapy group disguised as a finance seminar. I told them something I had never said out loud. We can rebuild money. But trust has a longer payroll cycle. The line hung there, and then people nodded like they were counting the same invisible months. One woman wrote it down. Another whispered, "That's going on my fridge." I laughed and said humor keeps the receipts from molding. Later after the meeting, the facilitator asked if I'd let her include my quote in their newsletter. I said sure, but please make it anonymous. She smiled. You'd be surprised how many anonymous quotes have your initials, Dana. The next week, I printed the phrase in bold and taped it inside the HR office above the copy machine. We can rebuild money. But trust has a longer payroll cycle. Tina saw it first. She burst out laughing and said we should trademark it. I said we already did emotionally. Over time, people started referencing it during meetings whenever things went sideways. Someone would shrug and say, "Guess trusts, still on payroll delay." It became our inside joke, the kind that heals without pretending it never hurt. That Friday afternoon, I left work early. The rain was steady, but not cruel. On the drive home, I passed the old coffee shop where Mark used to wait for me after work, pretending to read while checking crypto prices. It was closed now, replaced by a bakery called New Balance. The sign made me laugh until I cried. At home, the dog greeted me with a bark that sounded suspiciously like applause. I made tea, sat by the window, and opened my ledger one last time. I wrote week 12, audit complete, balance permanent. Then after a pause, I added one more line, healing accrued daily. I closed the book and let the rain finish the sentence for me. 1 year later, I stood in a new office with my name etched on the glass door. Dana Whitmore, HR Finance Lead. The title looked heavier than it felt. The sunlight from the 15th floor spilled across my desk, landing on the same ledger I had carried through every storm. The pages were worn, corners curled, but it still smelled faintly of coffee and determination. Outside the window, Portland moved in its usual rhythm, rain trying to decide whether to fall or not. The company had changed since the scandal. We had new systems, tighter protocols, and an unspoken respect for quiet diligence. People smiled differently at me now, not out of gossip, but gratitude. They called me the woman who caught the ghost contractor, though no one ever said his name aloud anymore. That was fine. Names are just placeholders for lessons. Around noon, I went out for lunch umbrella in hand, thinking about nothing in particular. The city had that early spring light that makes everything look slightly more forgiving. I opened my phone to order an Uber. The driver's name popped up, Mark W. I froze for half a heartbeat. The profile photo was old, but the smirk hadn't aged well. For a moment, I imagined the conversation if I got in the car. Small talk over the hum of the engine. "So what do you do now, Mark?" He'd probably say something about temporary gigs and finding purpose. I smiled to myself, then hit cancel. Some debts don't deserve tips. I stood there a moment longer, watching the raindrops gather on the umbrella, each one catching light, like a decimal point in a long, balanced equation. Then I walked to the corner cafe and bought my own lunch, paid in cash, and left an exact 20% tip, because some balances matter more than others. Back at the office, Tina was waiting by my desk with a cupcake and a grin. "Promotion cupcake," she said. I told her promotions don't usually come with frosting. She said yours does. We split it like coworkers who had survived a war only spreadsheets could tell. She asked if I had heard about Mark's old company. I said no, and she said they went under. Apparently, his friend Brian had been caught double billing 2 other firms. The news headline read, "Consulting Firm Faces Collapse After Audit." I laughed quietly and said poetic symmetry. She said karma keeps receipts. I said with interest. Later that afternoon, I stayed late running the end-of-month payroll, something soothing about the click of each confirmation box. Every number in order, every deduction precise, every name accounted for. When the system finally finished processing, the screen showed a clean green checkmark. Payroll cycle completed successfully. I exhaled slow and even. The sound of justice apparently was just confirmation tone number 87. I leaned back in my chair and watched the city settle into dusk. Lights flickered on across the skyline, small, steady proofs that work kept the world moving. My reflection in the glass looked older, but lighter, the kind of face that has counted every scar and decided they add up to something worthwhile. I thought about Mark wherever he was, maybe still driving, maybe starting another ill-fated project, maybe sitting in silence trying to figure out how everything unraveled. I hoped he learned what numbers never lie about input determines output. That night before leaving, I wrote one final entry in my ledger. Year 1. Audit closed. Revenge compounded. Under it, I added an equation just for me. Peace greater than profit. On the drive home, the radio played an old song we used to argue about. He thought the lyrics were about loss. I always said they were about survival. Now I realized they were both. When I parked, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled like clean concrete and new beginnings. I walked inside, fed the dog, poured a glass of wine, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open to a blank page. It was time to start a new ledger, not for money, but for gratitude. First line. 10,000 bonus, 2 new friends, 1 unshakable peace. I paused, then added another line. 47,000 stolen, 47 lessons earned. Later, when the house was quiet, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer across puddles. The reflection looked almost like balance sheets of light and shadow. I whispered the words that had become my private epilogue. He stole 47,000, but he taught me something priceless: revenge compounds. The sentence felt final, like the last entry in a very long reconciliation. The dog stretched, sighed, and fell asleep by my feet. I smiled, closed the notebook, and turned off the lamp. The night outside was clean, steady, and entirely mine. 6 months after the promotion, the office walls felt smaller, not because of pressure, but because life had started to outgrow them. Numbers had always been my safe language, but now they were just tools, not shields. That was when the idea came. I called it Financial Boundaries 101, a small weekend workshop for women rebuilding after divorce. The local community center offered a classroom that smelled faintly of chalk and coffee, and every Saturday morning a handful of women arrived with binders, bank statements, and that same look I used to wear, the mixture of fear and exhaustion that comes from realizing independence costs more than love ever did. We talked about credit safety, retirement recovery, and the invisible math of emotional labor. I made them laugh, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident. I told them how my ex once labeled a $500 dinner as a client meeting, and how I reimbursed myself later with a $10,000 promotion. They laughed in the way people do when humor and justice finally meet halfway. One woman said she wished her HR department had someone like me. I told her she already did herself. That was the point, to teach them that control wasn't power, but peace. One day after class, my daughter Emma stopped by. She was 26 now, working for a nonprofit that helped families recover from financial abuse. She had my eyes and her father's sense of humor, though thankfully not his accounting ethics. She sat in the back, listening quietly while I wrapped up the session. When the last woman left, Emma walked to the front, looked at the whiteboard still covered in notes, and said, "Mom, you turned payroll into payback." I laughed so hard I nearly erased the quote by accident. Later, as we cleaned up, she said she never understood why I stayed so calm during the mess with Dad. I told her I wasn't calm, I was calculating. Anger burns fast. Proof compounds. She smiled and said that sounded like something I'd put on a coffee mug. That night, we cooked dinner together, simple pasta wine music from the 80s, humming in the background. It felt like peace, written in lowercase. After she left, I walked into my study where the old ledger sat on a shelf next to my framed promotion letter. I opened it to the last page and ran my finger over the ink that had faded slightly from use. The numbers didn't matter anymore, but the discipline did. Every week, every entry had been a breadcrumb back to myself. I thought about the women from the class, about Linda with her lost retirement, and Carol with her joint account battles. I thought about how they showed up week after week, learning to draw boundaries, like balance lines. Somewhere in the distance, rain began again, steady and familiar. It no longer sounded like loss. It sounded like rhythm. Before bed, I turned on my small desk lamp and looked at the photo of Emma and me from last Christmas. She had written a note on the back. To the woman who taught me that justice has receipts. I smiled and whispered, and sometimes frosting. In the quiet, I imagined Mark somewhere out there, driving late-night passengers, the hum of the road replacing the noise of excuses. I hoped he found peace, too, or at least math that finally made sense. My phone buzzed a text from Tina. She had just finished helping HR launch a new training video called Ethical Pay Practices. The final slide, she said, quoted me, "Balance is not revenge, it is repair." I typed back good math. Then I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about how strange it was that the end of one man's deceit could become the foundation of so many women's healing. The world, it seemed, always balances its ledgers eventually. Before turning off the light, I looked out the window. The street below glowed with reflections from the wet pavement, neat and symmetrical, like a payroll cycle closing perfectly on time. I whispered to myself, half amusement, half prayer. By Friday, his accounts froze. By Sunday, my peace unfroze, balance restored. Then I closed the ledger one last time and finally truly went to sleep.